Jim Gilmore, Tracy Halcomb. Welcome to the Baseball Bookshelf Conversations.
Thank you so much for having us.
Uh,
Yes, thank you.
you're here for your fascinating new film, Fielding Dreams, a celebration of baseball scouts. So the first question, well, it's not really a question. I think a lot of baseball fans, when they think of baseball scouts, they think of that scene in Moneyball, where Billy Beane is confronting a group of veteran scouts who don't believe in this newfangled ways of doing things. I go back farther. I don't know if you've seen the Stratton story, which is a biopic of a pitcher in the 1940s who had an accident and had to have his leg amputated and replaced with a prosthetic. Uh, Frank Morgan, who played the Wizard of Oz, was this itinerant scout who came upon him, Monty Stratton, during a Sandlot game or a semi-pro game, I guess it is. So things have changed a lot in those 70, 80 years, I'm guessing. How did you decide to do this film?
Well, I'll start with that one. So I have a second cousin who is a regional cross-checker for the Texas Rangers. And so he would always stop by at the family gatherings and he'd always be telling his stories, kind of crazy stories of being a baseball scout and the amount of traveling he did and how he's found this one kid or signed this one kid or did whatever. And I was just coming off, Tracy and I had worked on another documentary project about the women of professional poker. And so I was just coming off that project and I said, Brian, if you keep telling me these stories, you're going to be the subject of my next film. And so that was sort of the impetus. That's what got us started anyway. And Brian was a great resource because at first I thought it might be a relatively small documentary, really just focusing on him. And he started introducing Tracy and I to just an entire world we knew nothing about and all of these people. And once we would talk to another person, they would say, well, you've got to talk to this person. And it just sort of snowballed. And then along came COVID, which completely turned everything upside down. And so now we also had a documentary that was really showcasing what the Scouts went through in this fascinating period in the history of American baseball.
So just to be sure, I was going to ask this later, but since you brought it up, uh, this was planned without COVID in mind, wasn't it?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, we thought Tracy and I thought, oh, this will be easier than we'd spent 4 years working on the women of poker, and I think I can honestly say we were both looking for something maybe not quite as involved. And one thing led to another, and it ended up becoming, in many ways, a much bigger project.
And
And I'll let
I think it became at the risk of something. I think it became more interesting because it had to include COVID. Tracy, what were your thoughts about all the work that was involved? You were responsible for the sound recording. Is that correct?
Right. I produced it, and with the help of Brian Williams, again, Jim's cousin from the Texas Rangers. He was an area cross checker, and he a regional cross checker. I should probably get that right. Um, but as far as putting everything together, lining up all the interviews, figuring out once we got to these different events like perfect game of events where there would be a lot of teams and a lot of scouts represented who would talk with us, who we could record, kind of keeping track of the different teams. So we tried to get a large variety, and I think about two-thirds of all the clubs are represented as far as the different scouts. And then I was in charge of audio, yeah, in charge of actually recording the sound and then mixing it and kind of mixing the whole movie down then at the end.
It was almost kind of sad to think of these showcases. First of all, I'm sorry, let's go back a minute. You both mentioned cross-checker. For those who don't know the parlance of scouting, what does a cross-checker do?
Well, we didn't know ourselves when we first got started. So there's all of these layers of scouting, right? So we just thought, oh, baseball scout's sort of a baseball scout, and we're thinking of these Hollywood movies and sort of the lone wolf out there, catching these players. But then there's the levels above that. So you have the bird dogs, that are just kind of out there stringing along for everybody. Then you've got the area scouts. Then you've got the regional cross checkers. Then you've got a national cross checker. Then you've got the scouting director, and they're all kind of adding layers of eyes. So I think we had a great quote in the film that talked about how the area scout was really the heart and soul of scouting, and that the job of the layers above it are really jobs of reinforcement. So that when it comes time for the draft, it's sort of like, okay, you've got the main bit of information from your area scout, but if you've got to, if when push comes to shove and you have to really make that final decision, you've got some of these extra layers to help make that happen. And so as a regional cross-checker, Brian has the Northeast region, right? So parts of New England all the way into Ohio, parts of Michigan, down into Kentucky. And each team, their regions might be defined a little bit differently. There isn't like just one standard. And then on top of that, Major League Baseball has its own set of scouts too that we knew nothing about, that kind of cover the more prestige players for everybody.
Why does Major League Baseball have a scouting department? I would imagine it would be up to the teams to decide who to be looking at.
Well, I think it was done as a matter of equity, right? So back in the day, the teams with the most money could just basically buy whoever they wanted, right? And the draft was one part of changing that. But then also along comes the Major League Scouting Bureau that provides for some of these smaller market teams with fewer resources and fewer budgets, at least some film on the more prestige players. So when it's their time with the draft, they have more resources in order to make the decisions they make. But our scouts point out that, you know, when they've got somebody that they found that they're kind of trying to keep under wraps, and Christy Woods, who's one of the scouts for the Major League Scouting Bureau, shows up, you know, it's a love-hate relationship. They're a little bit like, oh crap, you found our needle in a haystack.
Well, let's talk a little skin and bone here. Uh, you're the executive producer and director. What did that entail as far as your responsibilities for this film?
Well, Tracy and I, it's a really a producing partnership. So as director, I also run camera. So I'm kind of setting up the overall visual look of the film, and I was trying to figure out how to craft it into a story, into a narrative. And Tracy, as a producer, then is doing some of the more managerial work behind the scenes, setting up interviews, organizing travel, trying to keep me on task a little bit. But we go back and forth. I mean, it's not like it's not, you know, there's two of us. We're two college professors making this documentary, and normally it would be a crew of about 10 to 15 different people. So we're really sharing a lot of different roles and responsibilities. And I'll let Tracy take it from there.
Yes, Tracy, talk about what you did as far as, I mean, when you think about the ball players play half of their games at home in their home stadiums. Scouts are always on the road. You guys are chasing the scouts, so you had to be on the road for a good portion. Tracy, how did you balance all of those things?
Well, the reason it took us from July 2019 to probably the end of November of 2023 is Jim and I, as college professors, we would shoot during spring break. We would go on long extended weekends, but we probably did, I would say, probably anywhere between 18 to 21 different shoots, different trips, traveling pretty much anywhere we could find more than one or two scouts. So we were in, up in the Midwest, we were on the East Coast, we were down south in Florida where thank goodness they have showcases and that's not too far. But it was just a lot of kind of Brian telling us, hey, here's 5 events. Can you guys come to any of them? And and here are the different teams that are going to be represented. So Jim and I would kind of look at who was going to be there and for how long. Was there any way we could rearrange our class schedule around to try to get off and go shooting? So there was an awful lot of travel to try to figure out and still keep our full-time jobs that help us do this hobby. I mean, we didn't want to, and it was nice because it did take us quite a while shooting in the summers and then shooting on spring break and shooting over the holiday. It was nice to go to Puerto Rico over our holiday break one year, and so I mean, we had a lot of travel, organizing that and trying to figure out who to talk to once we got there, who was available. So that's a lot of, and then I would do the majority of the interview, and then at the end, Jim would come in if I'd forgotten something and ask some more questions on different things. Um, but I mean, it was a lot of fun. It was, the more we learned about baseball, the more we realized we didn't know. And so as lifelong baseball fans, we felt pretty confident going into it. And then, like Jim said, we were just overwhelmed with all the stuff that was brand new to us. We were just finding out. So we're hoping that seasoned baseball fans find something really exciting about the content. And then just casual baseball fans just are really drawn to the different stories and just the very human nature of the scouts. A lot of them opened up to us about, some of the challenges they face personally, and professionally. And I just think it's just a really nice heart-rendering story, with some very controversial issues we talk about, not to let Major League Baseball off the hook. We also bring up some interesting things about, racism in baseball and sexism in the scouting industry, and also the ageism uh, lawsuit that some of the scouts are bringing against Major League Baseball. So it's not I mean, it's, I think, an overwhelming, warm, feel good story, but we also don't pussyfoot around the issues that Major League Baseball needs to contend with.
So, Tracy, tell me something that really surprised you that you weren't expecting working on this project.
I didn't realize I didn't realize the layers of scouts, for one thing. And probably the biggest surprise for me was that scouts sign 1-year contracts. I mean, there's no longevity to their employment. I was just flummoxed with that. I thought, well, you just did a fabulous job. You've got all these guys drafted, and some of them are doing really well, but there's no job security at all. They're lucky. Probably less than 5% get 2-year contracts at any given time in their careers. I mean, these are guys that are tried and true scouts. I mean, they've been doing it for 20 and 25 years, doing it very well, being able to secure really quality talent, right? And they still have absolutely no job security, at any point can be let go.
Jim, how about you?
I think one of the things that really surprised me was just how little sometimes a scout needed to watch a game. I always had it in my head that a scout showed up and watched a baseball game and took their notes. I had no idea that many times it was really watching an inning or part of an inning, or simply going to watch batting practice. So the first time we went to a wooden bat event, which was a big showcase kind of event, you'd watch scouts start one place to watch one pitcher throw like 3 or 4 pitches, and then we're going to crawl the way across to 4 fields down to watch a batter do some other thing for just a little bit of time. And so it's the microcosm, the sort of the micro observations they're making. When I was just imagining in my head, they were sitting there sort of watching entireties of games. And there's these very specific little things that they're looking for. Maybe it's just to see after the batter strikes out, what kind of a face they make. And then they have that in their notes, and then off they go to get the next bit of information they need on the next player. And certainly they have people that they follow much more strongly. But I was just sort of flabbergasted by the information they could get in just a very small amount of time.
Do you think that's because of their experience or because of time constraints?
I think it's a little bit of both, but but the best scouts really talk about this, right? Sort of what's in their heart, what's in their gut. It's a very intuitive kind of business. And so they see certain things that check off for them and good. And now they're off for a while and they want to come back a little bit later and see is that check mark still in place? And if it is long enough, then it confirms what they need. So it's amazed me just all these little bits of information that they're juggling at any one time to get the whole picture of a player.
Tracy, you mentioned some of the problems facing the scouting system, including sexism. You did have a female scout that you interviewed. I'm sorry I didn't write down her name. How do players who are at this point all male, do they respond any differently to a female scout than a male scout, or is it just because of the title they have a scout that they're respectful regardless?
I think that's exactly right. I think you hit it on the head that the players are just thrilled that any scout shows up to get some video on them and ask them questions, maybe chat with them a little bit, watch them throw, watch them hit. I think the players are very respectful. And Christy Wood, she's the female Major League Baseball video scout. She goes gets film on everything, and it goes out to all of the different teams, the players that she covers. Um, and I think the players are very respectful. I think they don't care who is behind the lens. If that helps, she definitely gets them way more exposure than if just one single scout would, come from the Detroit Tigers or something. I mean, they know, or at least they find out very quickly that her video goes out to all of the teams. So all of a sudden, their profile just got raised greatly. So I think the players are just happy that anyone's watching them, interested in them. I truly don't think they care male, female, whatever. They're just happy to have a scout pay attention to them.
And you also mentioned racism. Jim, do you think that's more of an economic effect? Do you think it's because it gets so expensive to join travel teams, to go to showcases, to get coaching, whereas a couple of generations ago, none of those options existed, and perhaps some of the younger players in the inner cities just can't afford to compete economically with kids who come from better off backgrounds?
Exactly. We interview Lou Collier in the film, former Pittsburgh Pirate player, who started Lou Collier Baseball really as a way to kind of address an interest in baseball in the inner city. And one of the criticisms he leverages at Major League Baseball is the fact that, look, you're building all of these academies in the Caribbean islands, in South America, but you're not investing the same kinds of resources into inner city USA. And so we've lost in baseball a lot of the black athletes. And the percentage, and I haven't memorized the number off the top of my head, and I should know it because it was just in the film we watched in Cooperstown, because I cut it in there. But really, it's incredibly dramatic. It goes from like 18% opening day, 14 years ago, down to like 6% opening day this past year, and it's just a dramatic decline in the black baseball player, and the fact that the game really needs to address why that is. Certainly, soccer is a competing factor, but probably not as much for the inner city athlete. They're much more drawn to basketball and football. Some of that has to do with the fact that there isn't the same kind of minor league system that baseball has, but a lot of it has to do with that there's no real academies in the inner city developing these players and building them up and giving them the same kind of opportunities.
Okay, back to the nuts and bolts of this. How did you come up with the funding for this?
Okay, well, remember, we're college professors. So what we would do is Tracy and I would apply for different kinds of faculty development grants. So when the project started, I was at the University of Michigan, Dearborn, and so I would write faculty development grants, which we were able to do every year. We also had certain travel funds for our research. And when you teach media production, when you teach film production, creative publication, making a movie, making a documentary, is part of our publishing work.
Mm.
And so we would leverage whatever resources we could from our academic institutions to help. That being, and we also did raise some money, and Tracy was instrumental in this through Women in Film and Television in Florida
Yeah.
to help cover some costs. But we really had to scramble and produce this on a much lower budget than a lot of our contemporaries in the world of documentary film would be used to. And that's another reason it took us 4 years rather than a year, year and a half. We had to keep working to keep generating funds in order to make the film.
Tracy, when it comes to putting this together in the editing bay, I think a lot of people, when especially when they look at documentaries, it's not like a feature film where you know that they're doing take after take after take, doing it from different angles and whatnot. You don't have that luxury, I imagine. When you're sitting down to interview someone, you got those 5 minutes or 10 minutes, and that's it. Uh, but when it comes to putting everything together in the editing bay, uh, a lot of people don't realize what goes into that and the decisions that have to be made. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, Jim is our primary editor, and he's a mastermind at coming up with a storyline that we can follow as far as our documentary. We were incredibly lucky that we interviewed a baseball historian at Cooperstown, the Baseball Hall of Fame and Museum. His name was John Odell,
Mhm.
and he was so informative. I mean, he anticipated questions. He gave us information that we didn't know enough to ask about. And he was just his interview. I believe Jim put it during the screening at the Hall of Fame that John Odell's interview really became the story spine of the structure of the documentary. I mean, we just kind of used his knowledge, his expertise to kind of guide us through and explain a lot of the terminology and the concepts. So as far as crafting it, it was interesting because we don't use a narrator. And for this project, we felt as though we needed to. We needed to. So Jerry Blevins, the voice of the New York Mets, he agreed to work with us, and Jerry's a great guy, and he did the wonderful narration, which Jim and his daughter Grace helped script. So as far as putting it together, you find the one interview that really kind of says it all. Now understand, Jim's looking through 60 hours of interviews to cut this down to 87 minutes. And so it was a great task just to put together even the first I think the first rough cut was it around 4 hours, Jim, that you put together, and then you were like, okay, I'm gonna try to get it, and so each version just got a little skinnier and a little shorter and um but it was I mean it was a labor of love, but it was overwhelming. When he told me he had so many hours to kind of wade through, I thought, oh, you got to be kidding me. I thought we had a lot with our Poker Ladies documentary, but this was almost double the footage. It was amazing.
Jim?
And there's a real process. I think most people don't realize that most documentaries like this are scripted in post-production. They're scripted in editing. So you try not to come in with a pre-script in mind so that what you find through the interviews really dictates how your story goes, the flow of the story. And so what I would do is take all of these interviews and baseball scouts have no problem talking. They are some of the nicest people you would ever meet, but they're very extroverted and they have lots to say and lots of opinions. So there's no such thing as a 5 or 10 minute interview with our baseball scouts. We're talking 35, 45, 55, an hour, sometimes even longer, because we just get so much stuff. So I would go through and try to like narrow down the very best sound bites from each scout. I would then look to see what kind of redundancies there were. Who should I have talk about what? And I think for me, the biggest challenge was figuring out how to start this, because COVID came in the middle of what we were doing. I was afraid if we led with COVID, it would take over the film. And so it wasn't really until looking back at the footage, and John Odell had a soundbite about how baseball scouts are the one group of people in baseball that are not in the Hall of Fame. And that little piece of information really was the spark that I used to kind of start the film, so that it really begins on a wintry day in Cooperstown, looking at the Hall of Fame and saying, but who's missing from this picture? This is the story of the people that are missing in the Baseball Hall of Fame.
And if I may say, it is a uh, fascinating story and extremely well done. When all is said and done, you've made your final decisions, film's in the can. How do you go about the next step, which is marketing this thing?
Well,
Well, that's kind of what we're doing now. We're trying to just get the word out. It was nice. Jim was on Major League Baseball Network's Hot Stove, talking about the film. He's done a little press with one of the scouts, Ken Madeja, up in the Detroit area, correct? And we got a really nice write up in ball9.com. Kevin Kernan gave us a very nice write up the film. And hopefully your viewers and listeners will be questioning Major League Baseball Network. Where can we see this film? You know?
Are you entering in film festivals?
absolutely. In fact, we've been accepted at the Sarasota Film Festival coming up later this year, and we're excited about that. But we've applied to a number of others too that we're hoping to hear from soon. And so our strategy is really after the Hall of Fame, which was just an amazing experience to be able to kind of premiere it there as sort of a sneak peek for our baseball scouts, to roll it out to some of the better regional film festivals. And we've got sending it out to broadcast outlets in hopes that maybe somebody will be interested in giving it a wider area. I think the main goal that Tracy and I have is to get this story seen so that people learn more about who the baseball scouts are and the kinds of challenges that they face.
Well, I know Montclair has a very well-received film festival. I hope you'll apply here so I can have a chance to watch it and hopefully meet you guys in person. We've been talking with Jim Gilmore and Tracy Halcomb for their work on Fielding Dreams, a celebration of baseball scouts. Guys, thank you very much for talking with us today, and best of luck.
Thank you, and thanks for having us
Thank
on.
you. Thanks for having us, Ron.
All right, take care.